Somewhere in the deep South, on a heavy summer evening before the war, a man stepped out toward the fence line, where the brush grew thick and wild. He reached into the hedge and broke off a branch loaded with bright purple berries. Then he stripped a handful of leaves, crushed them between his palms until they turned dark green and wet, and rubbed the broken leaves along the neck and sides of his mule. After that, he did the same thing to his own forearms. Within minutes, the cloud of mosquitoes and biting flies that had been tormenting the animal began to loosen, thin, and drift away. No bottle, no store-bought spray, no label full of chemical warnings. Just a common roadside shrub that his family had trusted for generations. What no one in that yard could have known was that hundreds of miles away, the United States government would soon spend years and enormous effort searching for the same kind of protection. Federal scientists would test more than 40,000 chemical compounds, trying to solve a problem that was already growing along southern fence rows. Welcome to Botanical Vault. Tonight, the archive opens on a plant that most garden books treat as an ornamental shrub, but older families knew as something far more practical. Botanists call it Calicarpa americana. Most people who recognize it know it as American Beautyberry. It is the kind of plant hikers pass without stopping, even though its clusters of purple berries look almost unreal in late summer and fall. But behind that ordinary shrub is a forgotten story about indigenous medicine, southern farm knowledge, wartime science, and the strange way modern America replaced a precise plant remedy with louder, broader chemicals. This is not just the story of a bush, it is the story of how a plant that could repel mosquitoes, ticks, and biting insects was almost pushed out of memory, even after science finally proved that the old people had been right all along. The story of American Beautyberry does not begin in a modern laboratory. It begins much earlier, with the people who knew the land before it was measured, fenced, and renamed. Across the Southeast, groups such as the Alabama, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole understood this shrub as more than decoration. They used its roots, leaves, and branches in practical ways, not as folklore for entertainment, but as daily knowledge shaped by survival, heat, insects, fever, and long experience with the southern landscape. The roots, leaves, and branches were boiled into strong preparations and used in sweat baths to help bring down fever and ease body pain. The roots were also boiled for stomach and intestinal troubles, including dysentery. And the leaves were crushed and rubbed onto skin or animals to drive away mosquitoes, ticks, and biting insects. For working animals, this mattered. A horse or mule covered in flies was not just uncomfortable, it could become restless, weak, distracted, and harder to handle. So some people rubbed the crushed leaves directly onto the animal's coat. Others wove the branches into harnesses or bridles, letting the animal carry the protection with it as it moved. This was not random guessing. It was a system of observation. People noticed which plants insects avoided, which leaves released a strong scent when bruised, which remedies worked again and again, and which ones failed. Then settlers arrived, farms spread, and much of the original knowledge was ignored, renamed, or forgotten. But this particular habit survived. Across the Deep South, farmers kept crushing beautyberry leaves well into the 20th century. They did not always explain it with chemistry. They simply knew it worked. A grandfather would show a grandson. A neighbor would tell another neighbor. The knowledge passed in the same quiet way people pass down where to find clean water, which creek floods first, or which tree gives shade at the hottest part of the day. One of those memories eventually reached a botanist. His grandfather had told him that in northeastern Mississippi, people crushed beautyberry leaves and rubbed them on themselves and on their work animals to keep biting insects away. That memory stayed with him. American troops were fighting in the Pacific, where mosquitoes were not just irritating. They were dangerous. Insects carried diseases through jungles, camps, and wet military routes faster than any supply truck could move. A soldier could have the best training, and still be weakened by fever before he ever reached the front line. At that time, the repellents available to the military were not good enough. Many lasted only about 2 hours. In the heat, sweat, rain, mud, and constant movement of the jungle, 2 hours was almost nothing. The military wanted something stronger. They wanted protection that could last closer to 10 hours. So government scientists began searching. They tested compound after compound, not by the dozen, not by the hundred, but by the tens of thousands. Over the next several years, federal researchers screened more than 40,000 chemical candidates, looking for one that could keep biting insects away for longer than anything already available. Finally, in 1946, they found a synthetic compound that looked promising. The Army patented it. Later, in 1957, it was released for public use. Most Americans know it by 4 letters: DEET. And to be clear, DEET works. It became one of the most famous insect repellents in the world because it did the job. For decades, people rubbed it on their arms, legs, necks, and clothing before fishing trips, camping weekends, military deployments, and summer evenings in the yard. But here is the part that makes the story so strange. The same government that searched through more than 40,000 chemicals already had a natural repellent growing across its own southern states. It wasn't hidden deep in a rare forest. It was not locked away in some mountain valley. It was in ditches, hedgerows, field edges, creek banks, and backyards. The laboratory answer was real, but the fence row answer had been there too. And because the modern answer came with a patent, a bottle, a factory, a label, and a distribution system, it entered American life loudly. The older answer stayed quiet. One was called science, the other was called folk knowledge. But sometimes the difference between the two is not truth. Sometimes it is simply who writes the report, who owns the product, and who gets believed. DEET was not the only reason Beautyberry faded from everyday memory. Another force pushed the old plant further into the background, and this one did not come in a small bottle. It came as a fog. For many Americans, mosquito control became something handled by trucks, sprayers, and chemical mist rolling down quiet streets at dusk. The sight became familiar, a machine moving through the neighborhood, while a pale cloud drifted over lawns, fences, gardens, porches, and drainage ditches. To most people, it looked like progress. The mosquitoes disappeared for a while, and that was enough to make the method feel successful. But the story behind those fogs is more complicated. Many modern insecticides used for mosquito control trace their design back to a natural substance called pyrethrum. Pyrethrum comes from the dried flower heads of certain chrysanthemum plants. For centuries, people ground those flowers into powder and used them to kill insects. It was known in parts of the ancient world, traded across regions, and later sold in early American drugstores as insect powder. The original flower had an elegant design. It was highly toxic to insects, relatively gentle on mammals, and it broke down quickly in sunlight. It acted fast, did its work, and then faded. Then chemists studied it, copied it, and rebuilt it. The synthetic versions, often called pyrethroids, were designed to be stronger and longer lasting than the original flower compound. From an industrial point of view, that made sense. A chemical that survives longer can keep killing longer. A stronger formula gives a more dramatic result. But nature does not experience these chemicals as a targeted solution. A fog does not know the difference between a mosquito and a honeybee resting on clover. It does not spare the butterfly crossing the garden. It does not protect the firefly blinking over the grass, or the dragonfly hunting mosquitoes near the ditch, or the spider waiting in the corner of the porch. The chemical mist may knock down mosquitoes, but it can also knock down the very predators and pollinators that keep a yard balanced. That is the hidden cost. When mosquito predators die with the mosquitoes, the yard can become less defended over time. The first wave of insects may disappear, but once the spray breaks down and mosquitoes return, fewer dragonflies, spiders, and other natural enemies are left to hold them back. So the loud solution can create a quiet weakness. It feels powerful because it acts fast. It looks effective because the air clears. But it is broad, blunt, and temporary. It treats the whole yard like the enemy, even though only one small part of the yard is actually biting you. That is why Beautyberry matters in this story. The old method was not a fog across everything. It was a crushed leaf, rubbed where protection was needed. It did not try to sterilize the yard. It did not turn the garden into a battlefield. It simply used the chemistry of one plant to make one person, one animal, or one piece of clothing less attractive to biting insects. In a world that kept choosing louder tools, the quiet plant looked old-fashioned. But old-fashioned is not the same as useless. For decades, American Beautyberry remained in an odd kind of silence. It was remembered by some older families. It appeared in plant guides. It grew in the same places it had always grown. But most Americans did not think of it as useful medicine or practical insect protection. They saw it as a pretty native shrub with purple berries, if they noticed it at all. Then the old story finally made its way back into a laboratory. In 2004, researchers in Oxford, Mississippi, decided to test the claim that beautyberry leaves could repel insects. A chemist named Charles Cantrell and an entomologist named Jerry Clun began examining the leaves, not as decoration, but as chemistry. They extracted compounds from the plant and studied what was actually happening inside those crushed green leaves. Over the course of their research, they identified several active compounds, including one especially important substance called calicarpanol. That name sounds modern, but the discovery pointed backward. Calicarpanol helped explain why people had been crushing beautyberry leaves for generations. The plant was not working by magic. It contained real chemical defenses that insects did not like. When researchers compared the plant compound with established repellents, the result was remarkable. Beautyberry did not merely show a weak effect. It performed strongly against mosquitoes, and its activity came surprisingly close to the famous synthetic repellent that had taken years of wartime testing to develop. It also showed activity against ticks and fire ants, making the plant even more interesting than the old stories suggested. Think about what that means. A shrub growing along fence lines, trails, and field edges had been carrying a serious insect repellent inside its leaves the entire time. Families had known it through use. Scientists later confirmed it through instruments, extraction, and controlled testing. The grandfather was right. The farmers were right. The indigenous healers were right. But it took nearly a century of forgetting, and then a formal research project, before the knowledge was treated as credible again. That is one of the strange patterns in plant history. A remedy can be used for generations, then dismissed as superstition, then rediscovered under a microscope and given a chemical name. Only then does the modern world begin to respect it. Beautyberry was never waiting to become useful. It was waiting to be believed. So what does this mean for your yard this season? It means you do not have to choose only between being bitten alive and covering everything in broad chemical spray. There is a quieter way to think about mosquito control, and it begins with bringing useful plants and precise methods back into the picture. American Beautyberry grows naturally across much of the southeastern United States, from Maryland down through Florida and west toward Texas. If you live in the right climate, you can plant it near a porch, patio, garden edge, or fence line. It is a native shrub, low maintenance, and valuable to wildlife. Birds often feed on the berries, and the plant can fit easily into a natural yard. When mosquitoes begin rising in the evening, you can strip a few fresh leaves, crush them firmly in your hands until they are bruised and fragrant, and rub them over your arms, ankles, hat, socks, or outer clothing. The point is not to replace every modern repellent in every situation. If you are in an area with serious mosquito-borne disease risk, you still need proven protection. But for ordinary evenings in the yard, this old plant gives you another tool. And there is a second method that works even deeper because it targets mosquitoes before they become adults. Take a 5-gallon bucket and fill it about 2/3 full of water. Add a handful of dead leaves, grass clippings, straw, or hay. Let it sit for a day or two. As the plant matter begins to break down, it creates an attractive breeding signal for female mosquitoes. To them, that bucket looks like a perfect nursery. Then add a mosquito dunk. The active ingredient is commonly known as BTI, short for Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis. It is a naturally occurring soil bacterium that targets mosquito larvae and a few closely related insects. It does not wipe out bees, butterflies, birds, frogs, fish, pets, or people. That is the beauty of it. A chemical fog treats the whole yard like a target. A BTI bucket tricks mosquitoes into laying eggs where their larvae cannot survive. One method spreads broad harm. The other uses precision. Cover the bucket with fine wire mesh so animals cannot fall in, and place it in the shade, away from children and pets. Replace the dunk as directed, often about every 30 days, and keep the system simple. A beautyberry shrub near the porch, a mosquito bucket in the shade, crushed leaves when you need them. Larvae stopped before they fly. This is not about rejecting science. It is about remembering that science and old knowledge do not have to be enemies. Sometimes the laboratory confirms what the fence row already knew. Before the mosquitoes build up this year, look at the edge of the yard differently. The answer may not be on the brightest shelf in the store. It may be growing quietly in the hedge, waiting for someone to crush a leaf and remember. If you want the next forgotten file from this vault, subscribe and stay close. Because sometimes the cure was never truly lost. It was only growing where modern eyes forgot to look.